On the night of August 4th, 1962, the most famous woman in the world lay alone inside a locked bedroom in Brentwood, Los Angeles. The lights were off. The phone was silent. Empty pill bottles sat beside the bed. By the time help was called, it was already too late. They said Marilyn Monroe died by suicide. They said it was an overdose. They said the case was closed. But how does a woman adored by millions, desired by presidents, and watched by the entire world die completely alone? And if this was truly suicide, why do so many details refuse to align even more than 60 years later? Before we tell the story of how she rose, loved, and slowly unraveled, there are 4 secrets surrounding Marilyn Monroe that must be placed on the table. These are not rumors. They are documented contradictions, details that never fully fit the official narrative. And the final one changes everything. Revelation 1. In the hours following her death, a personal diary allegedly vanished. Friends later claimed it contained names, phone numbers, and private conversations with powerful men. The diary has never been found. No inventory, no photograph, no explanation. Revelation 2. The timeline of her death does not match the emergency response. Medical estimates suggest Marilyn may have been dead for hours before authorities were called. So why the delay? And who was making phone calls while she lay unresponsive? Revelation 3. For years before her death, Marilyn was under quiet federal surveillance. Declassified files confirmed government interest in her personal relationships. Not because she was unstable, but because she knew people who were dangerous to know. Revelation 4. The most disturbing of all. The official autopsy declared a fatal overdose, yet doctors noted no clear pill residue in her stomach, and crucial evidence was either missing or never properly documented. If this was a simple suicide, why does it require so many explanations? In this video, we will follow Marilyn's life from abandonment to adoration, from the creation of a global fantasy to a death wrapped in silence. And by the end, you'll understand why some stories in Hollywood are not buried. They are protected. Long before the world knew her as Marilyn Monroe, she was a child no one seemed prepared to keep. She was born Norma Jeane Mortenson on June 1st, 1926, in Los Angeles, California. Her birth certificate listed no father, only a blank space where stability should have been. From the very beginning, Norma Jeane entered a world defined not by love, but by absence. Her mother, Gladys Baker, struggled with severe mental illness. She drifted in and out of hospitals, haunted by hallucinations and paranoia. Some days she was affectionate and hopeful. On others, she was unreachable, terrified, unstable, and overwhelmed by voices only she could hear. For Norma Jeane, childhood was not a place of safety. It was a series of temporary rooms, unfamiliar faces, and unanswered questions. By the age of 7, she was already being moved between foster homes and orphanages. Each move carried the same unspoken message: you don't belong here for long. She learned early not to get attached, because attachment always ended in loss. At the Los Angeles Orphans' Home, Norma Jeane slept in long rows of identical beds, surrounded by other forgotten children. There were rules, there was order, but there was no intimacy. Years later, she would say that loneliness did not frighten her, because it had been her first companion. Psychologists who later studied her life would point to these years as the foundation of everything that followed. A child deprived of consistent affection often grows into an adult desperate for validation. And Norma Jeane did exactly that. She learned how to smile when she was afraid, how to please when she felt invisible, how to become whatever people wanted if it meant she could stay. But survival came at a cost. Several biographers, relying on sworn testimony and court records, describe episodes of sexual abuse during her early adolescence. These moments were not public scandals at the time. They were quiet violations, buried, denied, and never properly addressed. For a girl already struggling to feel safe in the world, the damage was profound. Trust became fragile. Self-worth became conditional. Love became something she believed had to be earned. At 16, Norma Jeane faced another turning point. Her foster family could no longer keep her, and returning to the orphanage loomed once again. To avoid it, she made a decision that would change the course of her life. She got married. In 1942, she married James Doherty, a 21-year-old factory worker. It was not a love story. It was a lifeline. For a brief moment, Norma Jeane had what she had never known before: a home, a routine, a sense of permanence. But even this stability was temporary. When Doherty joined the Merchant Marine during World War II, Norma Jeane was left alone once more, this time as a teenage wife searching for purpose. She found work in a defense factory, inspecting parachutes. It was there, amid machinery and uniforms, that fate intervened. A military photographer noticed her. She had no training, no acting background, no plan. But when she stood in front of the camera, something changed. Norma Jeane didn't just pose, she transformed. The lens loved her, and for the first time in her life, attention felt like safety. Modeling jobs followed quickly, then screen tests, then contracts. Hollywood did not see a traumatized young woman searching for belonging. It saw raw material, and it began to reshape her. Her name was changed, her hair was bleached, her voice softened, her past erased. Norma Jeane Mortenson, the abandoned child, the frightened teenager, the girl who never learned how to feel secure, was quietly pushed aside. In her place, a new figure emerged, a woman designed to be adored, a woman designed to be consumed, a woman who would one day become the most famous face on earth, while still carrying the wounds of a child who was never chosen. And the tragedy was already set in motion. When Hollywood took Marilyn Monroe in, it did not ask who she was. It asked what she could become. In the mid-1940s, the American film industry was a factory. Studios owned actors the way companies owned machines. Contracts dictated appearances, behavior, even emotions. And young actresses, especially young women without powerful families, had little choice but to comply. Norma Jeane did not arrive with leverage. She arrived with fear. Fear of being sent away again. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of becoming invisible. When 20th Century Fox offered her a contract in 1946, it was modest and conditional. She was paid little. She was given no guarantees. But she was given something she craved more than money. She was chosen. Almost immediately, the studio began to erase Norma Jeane. Her name was deemed too ordinary, too fragile, too real. They renamed her Marilyn Monroe, a name that sounded glamorous, timeless, and easy to remember. Her brown hair was bleached into an unnatural platinum blonde, her eyebrows reshaped, her jawline softened with makeup and lighting, her voice coached to become breathy, childlike, and unintimidating. She was instructed not to walk, but to sway, not to speak, but to float through dialogue. The message was clear. Intelligence was dangerous. Sexual innocence was profitable. Marilyn learned quickly. She studied camera angles obsessively. She memorized lighting patterns. She practiced poses until her body became muscle memory. In front of the lens, she was electric. Every glance felt accidental. Every smile seemed spontaneous. But behind the scenes, she was exhausted. The studio controlled her schedule, her diet, and her public image. She was sent to acting classes, voice lessons, and endless photo shoots, often with little sleep and no privacy. And yet, she was still treated as disposable. Early roles were small, blink-and-you-miss-it appearances in forgettable films. She was often cast as the girl, not the lead, not the thinker, not the decision-maker. Executives admired her body, but doubted her discipline. They mistook vulnerability for weakness. What they didn't see was how hard she was working to survive. By the early 1950s, something shifted. Audiences reacted to her in ways the studio had not predicted. When Marilyn appeared on screen, people leaned forward. Men were fascinated. Women were curious. She wasn't just beautiful. She was present. Films like Niagara, 1953, and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, 1953, transformed her into a sensation. Her walk became iconic. Her smile became a symbol of post-war American desire. Hollywood crowned her a sex symbol and quietly dismissed her as unserious. That contradiction would define her entire career. Marilyn was expected to be seductive, but not demanding, famous, but grateful, powerful, but obedient. She was marketed as fantasy, yet punished whenever she acted like a human being. Behind closed doors, the pressure mounted. Marilyn suffered from chronic insomnia. She turned to prescription medication to sleep, then more medication to wake up. Doctors, studios, and handlers enabled the cycle, prioritizing productivity over health. On set, she was labeled difficult when anxiety caused delays. What no one mentioned publicly was how often she was medicated, exhausted, and emotionally unstable from constant scrutiny. Still, she pushed back. She read. She studied literature. She questioned scripts. She wanted serious roles. When she demanded better pay and creative control, Fox suspended her. The punishment was meant to break her. Instead, it made her more determined. In 1954, she made a bold move that shocked Hollywood. She walked away. Marilyn left Los Angeles for New York. She enrolled at the Actors Studio, studying under Lee Strasberg. She surrounded herself with writers, artists, and intellectuals, people who saw her mind, not just her image. For the first time, she felt taken seriously. But reinvention came with a cost. The more Marilyn tried to reclaim Norma Jeane, the more Hollywood resisted. Studios wanted the blonde bombshell, not the vulnerable woman asking for respect. Her body was her brand, her pain was inconvenient. Even as her fame skyrocketed, her sense of self fractured. Publicly, she was smiling on magazine covers. Privately, she doubted her worth. She once confided to friends that people were in love with Marilyn, but no one seemed interested in the woman underneath. The fantasy had become a prison, and the higher she climbed, the harder it became to escape. By the late 1950s, Marilyn Monroe was one of the most famous women on the planet. She earned millions at the box office. Her image was recognized worldwide. Yet she remained deeply insecure, terrified that if she stopped performing, the love would disappear. Because in her experience, it always had. And that fear, rooted in childhood abandonment and sharpened by Hollywood's cruelty, would follow her into every relationship, every marriage, and every moment of silence. The machine had built a goddess, but it had never learned how to protect a woman. For Marilyn Monroe, love was never separate from survival. She did not fall in love casually. She attached. Each relationship carried the same unspoken hope. Maybe this time I won't be abandoned. Joe DiMaggio, protection that became possession. In 1952, Marilyn met Joe DiMaggio, one of the most famous athletes in America. He was disciplined, private, and deeply traditional. Everything Hollywood was not. To Marilyn, DiMaggio felt like safety. He adored her. He protected her from reporters. He promised stability. But admiration soon turned into control. DiMaggio struggled with Marilyn's image. He wanted a wife who belonged to him, not a woman the world consumed. Their marriage in January 1954 lasted only 9 months. The breaking point came during the filming of The 7-Year Itch. As Marilyn stood over a subway grate, her white dress billowing upward, cameras flashed and crowds roared. DiMaggio watched from the sidelines, furious, humiliated. That night, according to multiple accounts, he exploded in rage. The marriage never recovered. For Marilyn, the message was devastating. Even when she was loved, she was still too much. Arthur Miller, Mind Over Fantasy. In 1956, she married Arthur Miller, one of America's most respected writers. This relationship was different. Miller admired her intellect. He encouraged her curiosity. He promised understanding. For a moment, Marilyn believed she had finally escaped the stereotype. But the cracks appeared quickly. Miller was uncomfortable with her fame. He felt overshadowed. Privately, he questioned her depth. When Marilyn miscarried, she spiraled into depression. Miller withdrew emotionally. In his private notes, later revealed, he described feeling ashamed of her neediness. She sensed it, and once again love turned conditional. By 1961, the marriage ended. 2 marriages, 2 divorces, same outcome: abandonment. Affairs, rumors, and emotional dependency. Between marriages and after them, Marilyn sought connection wherever she could find it. Some relationships were brief, some were secret, some were deeply damaging. She became emotionally dependent on men who were unavailable. Married, powerful, distant. The more unreachable they were, the harder she clung. Friends noticed a pattern. Marilyn feared being alone more than she feared being hurt. As her romantic life grew more chaotic, so did her mental health. She suffered from intense anxiety, mood swings, and chronic insomnia. Doctors prescribed sedatives, then stronger sedatives, then combinations that no one properly monitored. Hollywood labeled her unstable. No one stopped to ask why. Isolation behind the spotlight. By the early 1960s, Marilyn was surrounded by people, but deeply alone. Studios grew impatient, friends grew exhausted, lovers grew distant. Her phone rang constantly, yet when she needed help, silence followed. She once told a confidant, "I'm trying to find someone who will stay." But in Hollywood, staying was never part of the contract. By the early 1960s, Marilyn Monroe was no longer just battling fame. She was battling herself. What the public saw was a woman at the peak of her power, internationally famous, financially successful, eternally desired. What they didn't see was how fragile her daily existence had become. Sleep was her first enemy. Marilyn suffered from severe chronic insomnia. Nights stretched endlessly, filled with anxiety, intrusive thoughts, and fear. Doctors responded not with therapy, but with prescriptions: barbiturates to sleep, amphetamines to wake, alcohol to calm the edges. No single drug killed her. It was the routine that did. At the time, Hollywood treated prescription medication as maintenance, a way to keep stars functional, not healthy. Marilyn trusted her doctors. She had been taught to. But the combinations she was given were dangerous, especially when mixed with alcohol and emotional distress. As her dependency grew, so did her paranoia. She became convinced she was being monitored, that conversations were being reported, that people around her were not telling her the truth. In some cases, she wasn't entirely wrong. Government files later confirmed that federal agencies had taken an interest in her associations. In the climate of the Cold War, knowing powerful men made you visible, even if you were just an actress. The pressure intensified her sense of being trapped. Professionally, things were also falling apart. On film sets, Marilyn struggled with punctuality and memory. Sometimes she arrived late. Sometimes she forgot lines she had rehearsed the night before. The press called her unreliable. Studios called her a liability. What they didn't acknowledge was how often she was sedated just to get through the day. During the production of Something's Got to Give in 1962, tensions exploded. Marilyn missed multiple days of filming due to illness and exhaustion. Executives lost patience. She was fired publicly. The humiliation was devastating. This was the same industry that had built her, and now it was discarding her. Friends noticed a shift. She became withdrawn. Her calls grew more desperate. She spoke often about feeling used up. Yet there were signs of hope, small ones, but real. Marilyn had plans. She was negotiating new contracts. She talked about starting over. She spoke about wanting children, stability, and privacy. She was not talking like someone preparing to die. She was talking like someone trying to survive. But survival requires support, and by this point, Marilyn had very little left. Her relationships were strained, her trust was fractured, her body was dependent on substances she no longer fully controlled. The image of the blonde goddess remained intact, but the woman beneath it was unraveling. She was famous beyond imagination. Yet when she needed protection, guidance, or even rest, there was no system designed to save her, only to keep her working. And when she could no longer do that, she was left alone with the consequences. In the final weeks of her life, Marilyn Monroe appeared to be standing at a crossroads. Despite public humiliation and private despair, she was making plans. She had recently moved into a new home in Brentwood, Los Angeles, a quiet, Spanish-style house meant to offer privacy and control. For the first time, the property was entirely hers. No studio, no husband, no handlers living under the same roof. Friends later said she spoke of the house as a fresh start. She was also renegotiating her career. After being fired from Something's Got to Give, conversations resumed behind the scenes. Executives were suddenly interested again. Marilyn still had value. In early August 1962, she appeared fragile but focused. She made phone calls. She hosted visitors. She spoke about future projects. Nothing in her behavior clearly indicated finality. Saturday, August 4th, 1962. That Saturday unfolded quietly. Marilyn spent much of the day at home. She spoke with friends on the phone. She received prescriptions, sleeping pills she had been using for years. Her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, was present that evening. So was Marilyn's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, who had become a constant presence in her life. Greenson believed Marilyn was emotionally unstable. He worried she might harm herself. At some point during the night, Marilyn retreated to her bedroom. The door was locked. Hours passed. Around 3:30 a.m., Murray noticed light coming from under the bedroom door. She knocked. No response. She grew concerned and called Dr. Greenson instead of emergency services. This decision would later raise questions. Greenson arrived and entered the room through a window. Inside, Marilyn lay face down on her bed. She was naked. A telephone rested in her hand. Empty pill bottles sat nearby. She was pronounced dead shortly after 4 a.m. on August 5th, 1962. She was 36 years old. The immediate aftermath. News traveled fast. By morning, radio stations announced the death of Hollywood's most famous woman. Within hours, the narrative solidified. The cause of death was declared probable suicide due to acute barbiturate poisoning. The case moved quickly. Too quickly, some would later argue. The bedroom had been disturbed before police arrived. No fingerprints were preserved. The scene was not secured according to standard homicide protocols. The autopsy raised further questions. While lethal levels of barbiturates were found in her blood, medical examiners noted no significant pill residue in her stomach. This suggested either delayed absorption or a non-oral method of ingestion, a detail that complicated the suicide narrative. Still, the conclusion remained unchanged. The public accepted it. A troubled woman, a history of depression, easy explanation. But among those closest to the case, doubt lingered. Why was help called so late? Why were key witnesses' timelines inconsistent? Why were certain items missing from the room? And perhaps most haunting of all, why did Marilyn make so many phone calls that night, if she had already decided to die. Hollywood mourned her publicly. Privately, it moved on. Within days, her home was emptied. Documents disappeared. The story was sealed. The woman who had been watched her entire life slipped into silence, and for decades that silence would protect more than just her memory. More than 60 years after her death, Marilyn Monroe remains one of Hollywood's most examined tragedies, not because she was famous, but because the facts never fully settled. This is where the official story begins to fracture. Revelation 1. The Missing Diary. Several friends and biographers later reported that Marilyn kept a small personal notebook, not a formal diary, but handwritten notes she carried with her. It allegedly contained phone numbers, fragments of conversations, reminders, and thoughts she did not want to forget. After her death, the notebook was never logged as evidence. It was never photographed. It was never entered into any police inventory. Some claimed it was removed by someone trying to protect Marilyn's privacy. Others suggested it contained sensitive information involving powerful figures, information that would have caused embarrassment or worse. What matters most is not what the notebook may have contained, but this simple fact: it existed until it didn't, and no official explanation was ever given for its disappearance. Revelation 2. The Timeline Problem. The estimated time of death presented one of the earliest contradictions. Medical examiners concluded that Marilyn likely died hours before authorities were notified. Yet emergency services were not called until after 3:30 a.m. During that gap, phone calls were made, visitors were contacted, decisions were taken quietly. Why wasn't help summoned immediately when she failed to respond? Why was a psychiatrist called instead of an ambulance? No definitive answer has ever resolved these questions. Supporters of the suicide conclusion argue that those present panicked or acted emotionally. Critics counter that delays cost lives and raise suspicions. The gap remains unexplained. Revelation 3. Surveillance and Dangerous Proximity. Decades later, declassified federal files confirmed that Marilyn had been monitored by government agencies, not because she was a threat, but because of who she knew. In the tense climate of the Cold War, associations mattered. She moved within elite circles. She was present at gatherings involving politicians, diplomats, and figures of influence. There is no verified evidence that she engaged in espionage or illegal activity, but there is evidence that her proximity to power made her visible. Visibility, in certain contexts, is not protection. It is risk. Revelation 4. The Autopsy Controversy. The official autopsy listed the cause of death as acute barbiturate poisoning, classified as probable suicide. Yet the details complicated that conclusion. Toxicology reports found lethal levels of barbiturates in her bloodstream, but no corresponding residue in her stomach. Medical experts later debated possible explanations. Delayed gastric emptying, absorption through means other than swallowing, or a combination of medications that altered metabolism. None of these explanations were definitively proven. What is certain is that key evidence was missing or inadequately documented. No suicide note was found. No complete reconstruction of ingestion was possible, and the scene itself had been disturbed before forensic protocols were applied. This does not prove homicide, but it does undermine certainty. What the revelations actually tell us. Over the years, countless theories have emerged, some dramatic, others irresponsible. But when stripped of speculation, the core issue remains. The investigation was insufficient for a death of this magnitude. Critical decisions were made quickly. Inconvenient questions were left unanswered, and the simplest explanation was accepted without fully eliminating alternatives. For Hollywood, closure was convenient. For history, it was incomplete. The human cost of uncertainty. Perhaps the most tragic consequence of Marilyn's unresolved death is how it transformed her into an object of endless debate. Her life, already consumed by fantasy, was reduced to a mystery. Yet those who knew her described a woman who oscillated between despair and hope. Someone fragile, yes, but also planning, dreaming, reaching forward. Whether her death was intentional or the result of a system that failed to protect her, one truth stands unchallenged. She was not cared for in the way a human being should be. The secrets surrounding her death may never be fully resolved, but the pattern that led there is painfully clear. Abandonment, exploitation, isolation, and finally, silence. In death, Marilyn Monroe became immortal. Her image froze in time, the white dress, the red lips, the breathless smile. A symbol endlessly reproduced, sold, and reinterpreted. But immortality came at a price. Marilyn Monroe, the icon, survived. Norma Jeane, the woman, did not. For decades, the world has debated how she died. Suicide, accident, negligence. Each theory reveals something uncomfortable, not just about Marilyn, but about us. Because the real tragedy may not be what happened on one August night, but everything that happened before it. A child raised without stability. A young woman taught that love must be earned. An actress transformed into a product, then punished for wanting autonomy. She was praised for her beauty, but dismissed for her intelligence. Desired by millions, yet trusted by almost no one. When she struggled, the solution was never care, it was control. When she asked for rest, she was labeled ungrateful. When she faltered, she was replaced. Marilyn did not collapse in isolation. She collapsed inside a system that thrived on her vulnerability. That system still exists. Today, celebrities are monitored, medicated, and marketed with unprecedented intensity. The difference is visibility, not compassion. Marilyn's story endures because it is unfinished, not in the sense of mystery, but in meaning. She forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. How many times do we confuse performance with well-being? How often do we reward pain as long as it looks beautiful? And how many people do we lose before we admit that fame is not the same as care? Her life was not a cautionary tale about weakness. It was a warning about neglect. In the end, Marilyn Monroe did not fail Hollywood. Hollywood failed her. She was loved for what she represented, but rarely protected for who she was. And perhaps that is the most enduring lesson of all. If the most famous woman in the world could be abandoned in silence, What does that say about the value we place on human life once the spotlight fades? This channel exists to remember the people behind the scandals, the humans behind the headlines. Because fame may be loud, but suffering is often quiet. If this story moved you, subscribe to Heirs of Scandal, because behind every legend there is a truth worth telling. And behind every scandal there is a human cost we should never ignore.